So hello again, this is Dr. Nyjon Eccles with part 2 of this two-part series, Bioidentical Hormone Replacement Therapy, What You Need to Know. BHRT can also abbreviate for Body Identical HRT, which is to all intents and purposes the same thing. So in part 1, we asked these questions, which is what and why do we need BHRT? What are the risks and the benefits of BHRT compared to HRT? What are the risks of BHRT in the context of breast cancer? We looked at that. Is it even necessary for us to be looking at BHRT? What's in it for you as a client? Is it safe? What is compounded BHRT, and is BHRT regulated? So again, we're going to cover these questions in part 2. But in this particular video, we're going to be focused more on the estrogens. Remember, part 1 focused on progesterones and progestins. Part 2 is going to focus on the estrogens. So without further ado, let's start with this. Normally when people refer to estrogen, they think it's one molecule. In fact, it isn't. As far as the body is concerned, there are 3 main estrogens, and they are estradiol, which is the main one people know about. Then we have estrone, also referred to as E1, and estriol. Now, all 3 of these estrogens are bioactive in different ways. So when we talk about estrogen, we need to say or be clear which one we're actually referring to, because they have different effects on the body. In the body, estradiol is reversibly oxidized to estrone, and both estradiol and estrone can be converted to estriol. So these hormones are interconvertible in the body. Now, this next point is very important. The potency of estradiol is 12 times that of estrone and 80 times that of estriol. So these 3 estrogens vary in their potency. E1 or estrone, there are 2 main estrogen receptors in the body, alpha and beta, and it's important to know that the activity of estrogen at these receptors is very different. So estrone tends to affect mainly the alpha receptor, much more than beta. Estradiol, or E2, it's about the same, stimulates alpha and beta receptors in the same proportion, but estriol stimulates the beta receptor much more than alpha. Now, if I just make one point on this, if you stimulate the alpha receptor, that tends to encourage breast cell proliferation. Whereas if you stimulate the beta receptor, it has the opposite effect and seems to be protective. So it becomes obvious looking at these that estrone, as far as breast health is concerned, is less favorable. Estradiol is somewhere in between, but estriol would be one of the more protective estrogens. Now, I'm not going to say too much more about this. I'm going to give you a link at the end of the video. For those of you who want to read more detail about this, I'll explain it in that article. So, now, in part 1, we looked at the different structure of progesterone versus progestins. Now, in this slide, it shows you estradiol, which is a bioidentical estrogen, versus a synthetic form, ethinyl estradiol. Now, I want you to notice the only difference is in this group here. You see, with estradiol, just this substitution here. Otherwise, that molecule is identical. And yet, look at the differences in effect in the body. Ethinyl estradiol, so all these refer to the synthetic form. This cannot be inactivated by normal oxidation. It does not interact with beta receptors, which we've already said and established, the science has shown. By doing that, it's a breast protective effect. Ethinyl estradiol is much more potent than estradiol, and it's more thrombogenic. That means it tends to form clots more than estradiol. So all of these different bioeffects from a single change in that molecule. So the notion that all estrogens are the same because they look similar is wrong, absolutely wrong. And we have established that clearly. Now, some more information, because remember in the first video, I said that after the Women's Health Initiative study was published in 2002, a lot of women took themselves off HRT because they were concerned about the risks of breast cancer, deep vein thrombosis, myocardial infarction, stroke. But subsequently, there was a lot of research done to clarify what was happening with HRT and where the risks lie. We covered it partly in part one because we talked about the differences between progestins, synthetic progesterone, and progesterone itself, the natural form. So what did we learn from these studies with estrogen? Well, with regards to inflammation risk, oral estrogen, but not transdermal estrogen, is associated with the increased activation of inflammatory pathways. What about cardiovascular risks? Well, oral estrogen, but not transdermal estrogen, is associated with increased risk of thromboembolism, so clots. Oral estrogen, but not transdermal estrogen, is associated with increased risk of stroke and hypertension. What about serum estrone levels? Remember, we said estrone is the one that is more stimulatory to the breast tissue. Well, oral estrogen, but not transdermal estrogen, is associated with greater serum levels of estrone, which can have damaging effects at higher levels, as we've mentioned already, and particularly with regards to breast cancer risk. Oral estrogen, but not transdermal estrogen, is associated with greater risk of developing breast cancer. So again, to remind you, these numbers refer to references, which I'll give you towards the end. What's the take-home message from all of these studies? That if you give estrogen, in this case estradiol, if you give it transdermally rather than orally, you avoid some of the well-established toxic downside, side effects, dangers by giving it by the transdermal through the skin route instead of giving it orally. So that's something else that we learned from these subsequent studies after 2002. Sadly, still a lot of confusion about this, even within the medical fraternity. And certainly, as far as mainstream media is concerned, this has never been headline news, and it should have been. Now, just to highlight this a little bit more, what we found, what we now know about risk of HRT and breast cancer risk. This was a study published in International Journal of Cancer in 2005. And this was on nearly 70,000 women, and they looked at different forms of HRT and looked at the risk of breast cancer. And what you have on the left here is the control. When you used estrogen alone, you can see there was an increased risk of breast cancer. When you used estradiol with a synthetic progesterone, there was an increased risk of breast cancer. And this is a different form of progestin or synthetic progesterone, again, increased risk of breast cancer. But when you look at this middle column, when you combine estradiol with natural micronized progesterone, same as control, no increased risk of breast cancer. We said that in part one, and this is just to look at the two things together. The take-home message from this, and it's been confirmed subsequently, is that when you combine estrogen with a natural progesterone, there is no increased risk of breast cancer and also no increased risk of thrombosis. These are the studies that the numbers refer to. So in summary, the popular view that hormones in all forms are dangerous, I think you've seen from the 2 videos now, that's false. Not all estrogens are created equal. In the same way, not all progesterones are created equal. Synthetic estrogens may tip the balance in favor of breast cell proliferation. This is less likely with bioidentical blends of estrogens, especially when estriol, which stimulates that protective beta receptor, is combined with estradiol. Progestins increase risk of breast cancer when combined with estrogen, but progesterone, the natural form, does not. Progesterone has a breast protective effect. So all the evidence suggests that women can have benefits of HRT without the risks if the hormones are administered in the correct form and by the correct route. So let's revisit, to finish, let's revisit these questions again. What and why of BHRT? Well, I think I've shown in both videos that it's critical the form that they're given. When you give hormones in their natural body identical, bioidentical form, they don't carry the same risks. And therefore they are safer, and particularly with regards to breast cancer risk, deep vein thrombosis, all the risks that are associated with the synthetic forms don't seem to be associated with the natural forms, and particularly when they're given correctly the right route. Are they necessary? Well, we said in the first video, a lot of women have majorly intrusive symptoms, and they are put off by taking HRT because they're worried about the risks. What we're saying, based on the science, is that it is possible to take HRT, BHRT, to alleviate those symptoms, but not carry the same risks. What's in it for you? As just said, a relief without risks. Is it safe? We've established that. And then we talked about what is compounded BHRT. I'm not going to repeat what I said in the first video. I would just refer you to that, where I discuss these points that I've highlighted again here. Now, just to finish off with, for those of you who want to read more detail about this, if you go onto my website, you'll find under the media articles section, you'll find an article called "Not All Estrogens Are Created Equal." There's one called "Not All Progesterones Are Created Equal" as well. So I leave you, for those of you who want to read more, to go to those to get more information. Thank you very much for your attention again. All the best.